religion rather, is, as I said, just giving God what he deserves. That's what religion most
Religion is the thing that presupposes that God is a thing that you can give what
Well, it certainly
they
also
deserve.
presupposes that God exists.
Yeah,
But
so that's what I'm saying. It's like you can't say that, you can't define religion as giving God what he will, but that's the whole thing. You're kind of sneaking the definition in without substantiating it.
yes, religions orient themselves toward God. That's true. So if you're
So it's
if you're an
belief
atheist,
system that orients itself towards a God, or
Right.
or tries to theorize about God or gods.
it acknowledges that God exists.
Yeah. Well, no, it's a belief that God does exist.
Yes,
you see what I mean there?
It's a true opinion.
I know that you see what I mean there, because I know you're a smart guy. So I know that like your rhetorical strategies can be on point. But the thing is, if you're saying
Why do you think they're on point?
I think it's on point because a lot of people who are watching this who might not like me or might not be
Maybe they
too
do like
versed, or maybe they do. But a lot of them who might not be too versed on like rhetorical strategies can see, because they believe it's like, yeah, it's just acknowledging that God
Why
exists.
do you think my
But
rhetoric is persuasive in this case?
I think that
is it perhaps because it's well reasoned.
No, it's not at all. I think it's
then why
because
is
of
it
the way
not
that you say things. If you would let me finish explaining
Sure.
why I think it's on point. I think because when you just said right there, you said it's acknowledging that God exists, right?
Yeah.
That's because it's a common sense statement to you and to your audience. If you say religion is acknowledging that God exists, that of course they're going to say, yeah, because I believe that God exists. And if you're religious, you acknowledge that God exists. But you kind of leaped past, which is why it's not reasonable or sound. You leap past the part where, wait, do we really know that a God exists? And if we do, how do we demonstrate?
Well, here's how we demonstrate. Things are in motion, right? We're in motion. You and I are in motion.
Yes,
the Earth is in motion. The stars are in motion. The galaxies are in motion. Things in motion do not put themselves into motion. So, like for instance, if I had a ball here, I could take this ball and I could throw it at another ball on that desk over there.
Well,
and then this ball that was moving that I threw would hit the other ball, and that ball would fall down on the ground. It would roll, and that ball would maybe roll over, I don't know, another little tiny ball on the ground, and you would see things continue to move as a consequence of those actions. So we can go back and you say, well, Michael, how did you start moving? And I'll tell you how I started moving, because my mother and father loved each other one night, and they created me. And how did that? And you can go back through all of these actions that caused movement. But ultimately, you're going to have to come to an unmoved mover, who is God.
Or no, you could actually, so it could be an unmoved mover. It could be that there's a finite amount. It reduces by finite amounts, the amount of movement. So in that ball analogy, when you throw the ball and it hits another ball, it would be slowing down because of the force of friction. So it could be something that was moving, or maybe has the potential to be moved that just hasn't been actualized yet. It doesn't need to be an unmovable mover. And if it
I'm not saying it. I'm saying the unmoved mover is at the beginning.
Yeah, I'm saying it doesn't. Yeah, I'm saying the beginning doesn't need to be an unmoved mover. And if it is, and we're bringing it back to a God perspective, then if God is the same today, tomorrow, always, and is the unmoved mover, then what does prayer do? Think about it. If God is changing their mind about something, not changing their mind, but say I pray to God about something, right? I want him to fulfill something for me. I want him to make my water into wine right here. Let's say that I pray to God for that. Right? He'd have to do something that he wasn't doing already in order to make that happen.
Well, but God
he'd have to answer my prayer, correct?
But if God were to exist, God would be the creator of all things, by definition.
Yeah.
So God would create not only space, but time. Right? So God would necessarily be outside of space and outside of time.
Oh, he wouldn't necessarily. He could.
He would.
Again, we're talking
about... If he's the maker of all things, then he made time.
No, well, I mean, if he's the maker of all things, he could make time, but he could also make himself subject to time, because, again, this is the power of a God we're talking about. We're operating on the framework that, as we understand time, the thing that has to create time has to be outside of it. But like I was saying,
God does enter into time in the incarnation.
Yeah, but
you've arrived at an important distinction between
Christianity and Islam. Before we get to the distinction, I want to press down on the fact that if God has created this water right here, this water currently is not wine. It doesn't matter at which point he decides to make it wine, he has to decide to make it wine. That is, in a sense, the unmoved mover moving. Because you have to be in a state of mind to, okay, I made this is water. I now want this to be wine. That is you making a decision. You are changing your mind about something.
Well, yeah,
if that's the case, then God has to be a moved mover. Because you cannot say that, oh, well, you know what, he's just an unmoved mover, but I'm going to pray to him and he's going to do something for me that he hasn't already done because he has to change something about himself in order to do that thing.
Well, our lives unfold in history, and the way to understand God's relationship to history is through a concept of providence. Christianity is especially an historical understanding of God, because God takes on human flesh in the incarnation and then lives for 33 years and then is crucified, and then on the third day rises again from the dead, and then he's on earth for 40 days, and then he ascends up into heaven and sends the Holy Spirit to his church, which is the visible expression of God's kingdom here on earth. So I'm with you in God's role in history, but the error you've made is that you have forced God to be subject to time before God made time.
No, I'm saying, but again, this is assuming that he did any of those things, but I'm saying, how do you know that he couldn't have made himself subject to that time? How do we know that it's without, how do we know that it's outside of the possibility of a God to both create
God
time
has to come,
and create himself in the time? How do we know that one has to proceed? How do we know that one has to precede another if we're operating on the framework of God?
Because the creator has to precede the created.
Yeah, but that's
space-time is created. It's part of the physical creation.
Well, does it have to? Again, we're talking about God here.
Yeah.
If I create something, I have to precede that thing. If God creates something, we don't know what God can do. We're here talking about abortion and life and everything in our aspect. Apparently, there are angels and everything that are subject to a completely different realm when it comes to life and how they perceive it.
We're all subject to God's sovereignty.
No, I know. I'm saying, yeah, I mean, of course, but I'm saying that for all we know, life could be created in a billion different ways. It doesn't even just have to be the way we came about. If we have angels, we have other things up in a different realm in heaven. That's life.
Please don't get into the aliens.
No, I'm saying that's life, but it's subject to a completely different subsect of rules. So we're saying the way we internalize it is, well, obviously something has to precede this other thing, has to precede this other thing, has to precede this other thing. That not only does not have to be the case with a God, even if that is the case, all it could imply is that there could be various things. It could gradually decrease. It doesn't have to be a singularity. It could be a string of things that are kind of gradually going about. It doesn't even have to. It could be an infinite
things develop in history.
Yeah, it could be an infinite regress for all we care. We don't know.
It can't be that.
How? Why can't it not?
Because there has to be an unmoved mover. Or I'll give you let's say if this doesn't persuade you.
If we're looking at change, right? If we're talking about an unmoved mover or whatever, how is it that change is just conceptualized as just something proceeding after another, right? Change could be a change in color, a change in property of something, right?
Yeah.
We could say that something created something or whatever, and it wasn't even necessarily just a progression of it. It just kind of shifted in color, or it gradually decreases, or any of the above possibilities, because we're talking about a God here. For you to assume that because one thing must cause another, must cause another, must cause another, and we can't have it go on forever.
I'm just saying it. Yeah, right.
How do you
this happened now? Just by definition, has followed the thing that immediately preceded it.
Yeah.
Right.
In our world, yes. So I'm saying if we're working within the scope of a God, we have no idea what laws or
we do, because we're made in the image and likeness of God. That's how we can reason.
Belief.
Well, but
so you can't say that, well, I know this property about God, and God definitely has this property because I'm made in the image of God, and this is how it works. But you're presupposing that God even exists in the first place.
How do you know anything?
How do I know anything? I usually analyze I think the basis for knowing things is subject to evidence. So basically, when I say I know that I'm here, right? It's not like I pulled out a bunch of dictionaries and I'm like, well, what is the definition of here? It's a known fact about the world that people exist, and I'm experiencing
How do you know that?
Because we can see that. We can observe.
How do you know that what you're seeing is real and not just a hallucination?
That's a big question. I don't think you truly can know that. I think I can know with it.
But you're very confident in your opinions.
I think
but you just said you're not confident that you know
And I'm also
anything at all.
confident in the things that I don't know. I think it's confidence being able to say when you don't know a thing. I think that...
But what you've just said is you don't know for certain that you know anything at all.
Yeah, I don't think you can know anything for certain. I'm
I
reasonably certain that you cannot know everything for certain.
Well, of course not. But I'm not asking if you can know everything. I'm asking if you can know anything.
Anything for certain. You can know it to a degree of certainty. I think you can get infinitely close to that 100. You can get 99.999 depending on
how can you get that close?
How
can you get that
evidence?
Close? How do you know that you can rely on the evidence that you're seeing?
Well, I think that knowing that I can rely on the evidence that I'm seeing. I can always like see evidence that leads me astray, but it's a process of like mental reasoning that you can see various things that lead up or that but give good warrant to believing a certain proposition. That doesn't by default mean that that proposition is true. Yeah. If you're gonna go for the brain in a vat, it could all be a simulation. We genuinely don't have an answer to that.
I'm not even asking that. I'm asking.
Well, that's kind of what you're asking.
It isn't. How do you know that you can rely on your faculty of reason to communicate to you the truth?
Because I think that...
How do you know that your reason is dependable?
If I think my reason's dependable, or I know my reason's dependable because of things like evidence. It's so when I look at when I'm analyzing, so I'm saying when you're building your reason, right? Why would you have reason to believe something? Well, I know the things that I have to operate within me right now. I know that I have articles that I can read about abortion. I know I have studies and everything.
But I'm asking one step further back than that.
Yeah, I'm saying I can say that like, oh well, I don't know this for certain. Again, that can track back to literally everything.
Maybe I'm not asking the question properly. I'm not asking how you have an opinion about abortion. I'm asking how you trust that any opinion you reach, that any perception you have about anything is reliable and has some accordance with reality.
So that's the brain in the vat question. Because what you're saying is, how do you even, so if I say, I think that this cup has water in it. And you're saying, well, how do you know that? And I'm like, well, we know that water exists. We have the molecular makeup, whatever. And you're like, well, how do you know you can rely on molecular makeup? I'm like, well, there's a field of scientists that have broken down the composition of water. And you're like, well, how do you know? But I'm saying, and you're saying, well, how do you know that you can even rely on that? And it's like, well, truthfully, I don't think you can know anything for 100%. But you can you can work within the framework that you're operating in.
It's an axiom, right? It's an axiom that you're just beginning with. So what you're beginning with is precisely where I begin, which is that you are made in the image and likeness of God, and the defining feature about you is your reason.
So you're saying that
what do you think it means to be made in the image and likeness of God?
So and it's funny because this argument doesn't even support theism, because you could be created in the image and a likeness of a God, but what's to say that God is the reason for why you have reason?
What do you think the phrase being made in the image and likeness of God means?
Literally whatever people who believe in a God want it to mean.
Well, what do you think it means?
Christians even disagree about this in the same way. It could be, we are just like God. We can be co-eternal with God if we take the right steps.
No.
Or it could be, there's Christian science. No, it's not Christian scientists. It's I forgot what the religious denomination of Christianity is, but they do actually believe that. They have like is it Mormons? They have a father, mother God, and they believe that each of them can become like God, but they can never excel to the level of God. That's just their personal belief.
Well, what would it mean to, what would it mean? It's funny.
Well, the thing is, I don't know what that
You don't know the answer. So the answer is
because I don't believe it.
Okay, but you can know things about things that you don't.
So whatever properties what I think that being made in the image and likeness of God is whatever properties you attribute to that God, you guys share similar properties.
It's not a trick question. There actually
that's what my answer is. It's whatever.
There's a more specific answer, which is our intellect and our will, our reason. That is what it means to be made.
That's the answer that you believe is the case, because you could very well believe. No, you could very well believe in your God, and people who believe in a different God than you could believe that being made in the image of them is a completely different subset of categories and attributes that we attribute to ourselves. Again, you would need to demonstrate that yours is the one and only correct one first before you base your axiom off of all that, because you're just working off a big assumption. No matter how deeply you believe it, at the end of the day, it is one big assumption. And at least I can show you progress and steps to where I can get to know.
You can't. You just said that you have to assume that your reason is reliable. You have to take that merely as an assumption, as a premise to start with. You can't.
You can test that. If I come up with various conclusions, say if we wanted to know something, say if we wanted to know what water is, right? Yeah. And if we came up with a criteria by which we measure that and the chemical composition and everything, right? And we study the water cycle. We study everything that has to do with water. And we come up with predictions on, okay, well, given these circumstances, water should act like this. If we got all our properties down and we reasoned through this and we knew this correctly, we're able to know something correctly, then given that, water should act like this in this given circumstances. We have yet to be wrong about that. I don't know if water can just go from freezing to just like vanish in an instant. It could, but we have no demonstration of that. All we have is a pattern of research and understanding to this point that shows that we're able to make predictions and see this is actually how this is working. So with that in mind, we can say, okay, this is fairly reasonable. We can rely on this. If we were just looking at it as like, well, water's clear, which means it must have some property of becoming invisible. Well, we can say, oh yeah, well, I think that's the case. But if it continuously gets proven wrong and it never happens, then that's not a reasonable thing.
But you're
if you're going to ask me, how do we know that patterns are reasonable? Well,
or how do you know? I mean, to use the example that you like coming back to, how do you know that you're not just living in a video game or something?
Again, I don't.
That would be an assumption. It's just a premise.
I don't know if I would. I don't know if I think that. I wouldn't call it an assumption or I wouldn't call it a premise or anything because I don't genuinely think that you can know that.
But you live as though you're not.
I don't think that you. I don't think
you live as though things are significant.
I don't think that even if your brain was in a vat, I don't think that means that the things we're experiencing aren't significant. That's one of the things that gets back to God. I think if we are living even without a God, I don't think that means that everything is insignificant.
But you live as though your faculties of reason are dependable and that you're not being perpetually deceived.
Well, yeah. And when you talk about perpetually deceived,
yeah.
How do you determine you're not being perpetually deceived? I think you're lying if you don't realize that it's analyzing the things that are at your disposal and making predictions and analyzing.
Right, you have to take it. You have
but
to.
But if you're going to say because we 100% don't know for certain that everything around us is a figment of our imagination, therefore we're operating on faith, and that faith is the same faith as this God who apparently has told you everything you need to do and could never be wrong, despite the fact that everyone else believes in different gods.
That's not quite what I'm saying. But it's close.
You're trying to draw that.
No, it's close.
What
I'm saying
working.
is that what I'm saying is that there are many different modes of inquiry, of philosophical deliberation, scientific inquiry, and all number of manner of inquiry. But they all have to begin with intuitive reasoning and with the assumption of premises, in the same way that mathematics has to begin with a set of assumptions. A plus B equals B plus A. You can't prove that, but those are those are some of the axioms.
You can prove that once you test it. If I say
Euclid about that.
Yeah, if I say 2 plus 2 equals 4, right? Again, we can say that the number system that we developed for it is like
you would have to,
a figment of language, but the principle, if you have 2 objects and you add 2 more objects and you count.
But I'm saying even more axiomatically. You have to begin with 3 plus 2 equals 2 plus 3, for instance.
Yeah, so if we did that, then we could run experiments or tests to make sure this formula applies in every scenario. We shouldn't get 3 plus 2 equals 1 plus 7. We shouldn't get that at any given point if our things are working correctly.
Let me see if I can press this.
If we continue to get these same answers and we continue to not be proven wrong in these same things, you can know with a higher degree of certainty whether or not you're correct about that.
If you can know anything at all.
You could never know for sure that everything around you is a figment, but even if everything around you is a figment, you still know things within that figment. And it's not necessarily like the same leap
you
of
just
faith.
don't know it, but you could be deceived at any
moment. But
you wouldn't necessarily rely on, say, continuity, that the world you're living in today is the same world that existed for a second.
But my thing is that you can't know that either. You say you can.
Right, I'm just beginning with certain premises, and then using my reason based on those premises.
Yeah, and if we're gonna begin with certain premises and everything, what would be more of being deceived? Us, in reality, all being brains and vats. But not only I'm comfortable with saying, I don't know that for certain, but here's these things I can work with. Whereas you say, well, no, we're not a brain in a vat. I know this story, and this story is the one true story, and everyone else's stories are wrong. While the whole time
greatest story ever told, you might call.
Yeah, greatest story you ever told. So it's like, which one it would be more of a level of deceit? You could say that it's just...
The one that's true. Would be the one that's true would be the true. No. The one that's real and true would be the real and true one, and the one that's a deceit would be the deceit.